Imagine living in a world where every move you make could be watched. The lights never go out. Privacy disappears. Every choice, every glance, every message monitored. And yet it all feels very normal. It may sound like science fiction, but in a way this is already our reality. This is the story of the Panopticon. A concept born in the 18th century, but still very much alive today, no longer as a building but as a system, deciding how we behave and how we think. In the late 1700s, English reformer Jeremy Bentham imagined a new kind of prison, the Panopticon. It was a circular building. Inmates were locked in individual cells, and in the center stood a guard tower. And from their cells, the prisoners were not able to see the watchtower, which means that they were not able to know if and when they were being watched. The idea was simple but revolutionary. If people think they are always being observed, they behave as if they always are. And Bentham really wanted to run these prisons like a business. For example, the guard and the governor were given financial incentives to make sure that the prisoners were not dying or suffering. This answered the age-old question, who guards the guard? However, the Panopticon was not just a system meant for prisons. Bentham wanted to implement the same system for hospitals, schools and asylums, among others. It was meant to be a system to manage people. And although the concept of a Panopticon building never became really popular, the idea remained. And it's becoming very relevant today. We're going to fast forward to the 20th century, where Michel Foucault took the concept of a panopticon beyond bricks and mortar. For Foucault, the panopticon was not just a building, it was a mechanism for power. He noticed something very interesting. Discipline had become central to society. Institutions like schools, hospitals and prisons gained the power to observe people and collect knowledge about them. Surveillance became internalized. People started watching themselves because they never knew when or if they were being monitored from the outside. George Orwell explored the same concept in his book 1984. Take a look at this quote. There was no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. You had to live in the assumption that every sound you made was overheard. In Orwell's world, constant surveillance isn't about control. It shapes the mind. Private thought disappears. Rebellion is neutralized. At that point, power is no longer about being able to enforce. It's about people assuming you can. Orwell focused on the state as the actor that was watching us. However, in modern times, things have shifted. In 1997, sociologist Thomas Mathiesen observed a new phenomenon. Television and media had created a viewer society. Now we had gotten the option to watch those with power, like celebrities or politicians, all from the comfort of our own living room. Media theorist Peter Weibel went even a step further. He said that we had become the guard and that we loved the power that we had been given. However, it was never this simple. We were never really in control. Somebody else was, and that somebody was gathering all our behavioral data behind the scenes. And that somebody was expanding their control over us. By the year 2000, surveillance had moved beyond buildings, schools or TV. Looking at this development, Brendan Hookway introduced a new concept, the panspectron. Unlike the panopticon, the panspectron doesn't focus on a single person. Everyone and everything is monitored all the time. Individuals don't exist as people, they exist as data points. You only appear out of the dataset when someone asks a question about you. This was the same time as the time of the openness movement, and this movement claimed that by making data widely available, we were democratizing. We were giving everybody the option to, for example, show oppression through social media. However, all this widely shared data also gave companies the option to monitor, to predict, and to influence our behavior. This is exactly what social media platforms relied on. Your actions, your clicks, searches, and even idle time online became part of a huge invisible system. In other words, we are now all part of the panspectron. A panopticon without walls, where surveillance is continuous, invisible, and unavoidable. Shoshana Zuboff calls this new status quo surveillance capitalism. She uses the example of Google, who at first saw all of that data like clicks or searches as waste, or mainly used it to improve the experience of users. However, during the 2001 dot-com crash, Google realized something very important. All of that data could be used to predict behavior. Suddenly, surveillance wasn't just about watching you, it became a business model. Companies could now anticipate what you were going to do before you even knew it yourself. Large datasets revealed patterns. Gigantic datasets allowed companies to predict and influence your behavior. And they could sell predictions about your attention, your choices, and your purchasing behavior. A famous example of this: in 2012, already 14 years ago, Target identified a teenage girl's pregnancy before her father knew. With enough data, almost everything can be predicted and influenced. So what does this mean for you and me? Our phones, our apps, our social media feeds, they are part of the panspectron. They observe, predict, and influence how we think and behave. And young children already spend over 4 hours a day on social media. Their attention, their time, and their emotion are all monitored, and their development is influenced. And social media bubbles influence what we get to see, while the motive of the social media companies is purely making money, not our interest. We now live in a system that influences our behavior without us knowing how. But unlike the original Panopticon, there is no central tower with a guard. We can watch, scroll, interact, consume, but we never see the full system. Bentham's Panopticon had an interesting and important side note. The guard could be guarded. And if he was not doing his job, he could be punished. Today, that logic breaks down. The modern panspectron does not have a central tower or a central point. Surveillance is now distributed across platforms, algorithms, data brokers, and invisible infrastructure. No one has a full view of the system, and the question who guards the guard no longer has an answer. Observation, manipulation, and prediction are now the background conditions of our everyday life, but we never actually see it. So what does freedom mean in this state of the world, when algorithms are able to influence and predict your behavior at every single step? First of all, we should be aware of the fact that this is constantly happening, because if we are not aware, we are not able to face this issue. Secondly, try to not be chronically online and try to be aware of your algorithmic bubble. And finally, try to do something in the physical world with other real people. You will find out that the real world isn't half bad. Thanks for watching. Leave any thoughts you might have in the comments, and all these sources are in the description.